Well, welcome everybody today for our HydroTerra webinar series. It's great to see so many of you attending today, and we really appreciate your time. Today, we're talking about improving agricultural productivity with technology. And we're very fortunate to have Scott McKinnon from DPI New South Wales to tell us all about the latest and greatest available there and how they are helping to get industry to adopt this technology to ultimately help them. So let's get into it. So firstly, in terms of who's speaking here, it's myself talking right now, Richard Campbell, Managing Director of HydroTerra, and I will be assisting Scott. Scott McKinnon is Program Leader, Farms of the Future for New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Agriculture. A little bit about our presenter today. So Scott has over 25 years of sales and marketing experience with a practical commercial agribusiness background and an applied technology focus. He's worked extensively in Australia, New Zealand, Asia Pacific, and globally based in Switzerland. He has led several innovation projects, testing and evaluating technology, agronomic modelling, applications on farm, and has specialised in commercial business best practice. For the latter part of his career, he has specialised in the agtech space, in senior management roles for local and international startups, consulted to corporate agribusiness and led lead producer focused technology initiatives. He is the program leader for the $48 million Future Ready Regions Farms of the Future program with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industry. And today in this presentation, we're going to hear really quite a bit of background about how New South Wales Department of Primary Industry is helping through these programs to get farming up to the next level of adoption of IoT. Just before we launch into Scott's presentation, a few things. One of the things we really like is your feedback, and Scott is very keen to get questions, both about IoT, but also about the program itself. So please feel free to ask questions. To raise a question, click on the Q&A and type into that. And at the end of this presentation, I will read out those questions and Scott and myself will do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them today, we will get back to you. So we keep a record of those questions. So please keep the questions coming. Why does HydroTerra run this webinar series? We like to share knowledge. We like to share the knowledge of both specialist monitoring technology, as well as to provide a platform for people such as Scott who have something to say to industry which we think is valuable to get out there. So we'd like to help with that. We also like to facilitate education. So we see this as a good way to train industry, and certainly feel we're getting some good momentum around that. But lastly, and most importantly, and this is where the Q&A comes into it, we like to understand the needs of the industry so we can help serve you better. So on to today's program. We've covered the introduction and I'm about to hand over to Scott, who's going to talk to us about improving agricultural productivity with technology, where to start. So welcome, Scott, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Richard. If you just want to jump to the first slide. Richard has asked me to be involved in the webinar series today because in between my two Farms of the Future projects, I was setting up some climate resilience projects which are Richard and the Malone Institute put an expression of interest in, and he'll talk about that later. But during our regular catch-ups, we tended to drift off subject and talked about agtech and agtech adoption, building awareness quite often, and what's happening in that field. And when I was giving him an overview of some of the activities New South Wales DPI is involved in that space, we thought it'd be good if I could share my insights into the programs I've been involved in, but also in general, some of the activities that New South Wales DPI is working on in the IoT space. So thanks, Richard, for that opportunity, and hopefully I can generate some interest. If you just skip to the next slide. This slide's what they call a technology readiness level. It's a standard sort of assessment of technology, not just in agtech, but across the board, from one at the research stage where you've got an idea and building a concept right through to fully commercialized application. The DPI in different divisions is working right across all 9 of these levels. The 3 inside ones you see there, Farms of the Future 1 and 2, and Climate Smart Pilots are activities being run by the Climate Branch under DPI Agriculture, which is what I'm part of. There's also some activities in the research station and the research station side. So I'm going to run through the Climate Smart and Farms of the Future components today, but it's also just important to be aware that we do have some fantastic facilities at New South Wales DPI in the global agtech ecosystem called the GATE, which is an incubator program for getting ag technology startups off the ground. It's been running for about 3 years now and has had some really successful people through the program. Sorry, is that better? And yep, and there's also some activity around activating the DPI research stations with LoRaWAN for research and commercial operations as well. So there's another program around that. So if we jump onto the next slide, please, Richard. The Climate Smart Pilots is a group of programs and activities under the Climate Change Research Strategy, which the DPI Climate Branch has multiple programs and streams running. Climate Smart Pilots is in 2 sections, and the first section was really around building an open sensor network, and that was backed off some previous work we did in the farm decision tech space in the very early days of LoRaWAN and LoRaWAN connectivity, and it's focused at building open networks in agricultural areas and then working with producers to get them on board with that technology. Skip to the next slide, please. So those programs are in 4 different sectors at this point in time. So there's a very large fisheries oyster monitoring program down in Bateman's Bay, an irrigated cropping research program in lateral move out at Trengy, large-scale livestock IoT work at Tullamore, looking at various parts of measuring and what we can measure to help producers be more resilient and more adaptable to climate. And then around Orange, a horticultural orchard program as well. Now, if you want more information on these particular pilots, that's available on the New South Wales DPI Climate webpage and also on the Farm Decision Tech webpage, which you can get to through there. And some of this data is accessible to the public, and the results are accessible on that site as well. Thanks, Richard. So the second part of the Climate Smart Pilots is really around demonstrating adaptation. And this is where I came into contact with Richard, because what we are really looking at in this perspective is not technology focused. It's linked to the same program, but it's really around looking at activities which producers are already doing themselves on properties to manage climate challenges and to build resilience, and then where possible fund those to expand them or to build more capability on top of those, and then really bring that out into the market by building case studies and running field days around those situations. So we've got 4 programs which are just kicking off now under that program. One's out at Cobar, it's around land management and trying to get better moisture infiltration in that particular area. We're looking at one in Young around precision agriculture and having a very high resolution precision agriculture so that we can have more timely management of climatic change conditions. Building on the farming forecaster program with the Monaro farmer systems in the south, and building some technology around about pasture management in drought conditions. And then one which Richard will say a few words about later is where Hydroterra are working with Malone Institute and the DPI around some regeneration modelling, and hopefully building a tool that we can bring out to market to show people where those activities can be successful. Thanks, Richard. I think everyone's aware that previously there's been a lot of adoption challenges with IoT in agriculture, and the first one is really having the right connectivity. A lot of the work I've been working on in the pilot program and the expanded program now with Farms of the Future is around connectivity, but also around the devices on farm. But it can be seen here in this adoption curve that agriculture is a long way behind a lot of other industry sectors. And I think that's really at a point now it's changing. There's a lot more capability in the market. There's a lot more technology available. However, there's still some challenges which we're hoping to address with some of the programs which we're running, building on that user experience, building some more information around that value proposition. And I know there's a lot of other industry bodies looking at this as well. And then building on that interoperability factor so that technology that producers do select can be used into the future and can link into previous and new technologies coming along. Thanks, Richard. So in 2019, the DPI was given some funding by the New South Wales State Government to do some field work to build information and evaluation going into a business case under the Snowy Hydro Legacy Fund. They're looking at how the New South Wales Government can provide better connectivity in regional areas. And specifically in this project, they're looking at farm and water environment and connectivity at a paddock level. A business case is being put together by external consultants for the government to look at ways that they could engage in the market and support that. And there was some questions around grower awareness and capability and how that could be built. So we set up 3 demonstration farms, one at Canamble, one at Narromine and one at Blaney. They were set up with commercially available products only, so it wasn't research or development. It was how can we enable existing technology and build on that. And we were really looking at the grower experience on installing and using that technology, looking to identify any potential gaps if we wanted to facilitate scale in this particular market. We looked across multiple sectors in 3 different geographies and installed comparable commercially available products on those properties. The concept at the time was that we were going to run a series of field days, bring in producers, build some training and awareness, get them out in the paddock, look at the technology, talk to the producers that we were working with, have access to talk to the suppliers. However, we all know what happened in 2019. So field days were really off the table for us. We had a really short deadline to be able to provide some evaluation into that program. So we had to switch our path, and we then looked at doing that in an online environment. So we did a lot of electronic work, produced some really nice video content of the producers for case studies, which people could view. We built some virtual farms with a bit of augmented reality technology, which was nice to work with, not as good as being on farm and looking and talking to the producer, but people could actually zoom around the properties and have a look at some of the technology. And then we ran a series of webinars. So to try and recreate the field day event, we had 3 webinars a week apart. First one introducing agtech, the second one running through the farmer case studies and having those collaborators actually speak, as well as watching the videos. And the third one was really having the suppliers speak about their experience in the program. You want to slip to the next one? Thanks, Richard. So out of that program, we developed a user experience review. So we had a consultant work with the collaborators and interview them and look for their experience with getting the hardware set up, installed, some of the challenges, some of the successes, and then actually what they were using and what they weren't using out of that technology to feed back into the business case. We had 3 really good operational pilot sites, which would have been fantastic to run some field days, but we didn't get to that. We have the webinar series and the web resources are all on the climate webpage. So anyone's interested, you can go and look at those tools. They're still live. Also started to build an agtech industry and grow a database. Obviously, key part of the pilot program was survey and evaluation, which was fed back into the business case as well. And then we worked with Tocal Ag College and Darren Price, who was one of our consultants on the program. And we've put together an ag guide, which is under the Tocal Ag Guide program called An Introduction to Agtech. That's currently a print at the moment and will be launching sometime in November. And that'll be available from Tocal. But that's a really practical guide written by Darren around identifying your pain points, understanding some of the technology, understanding some of the challenges and successes around agtech, but then also linking that into our 3 case studies. So we've got some really good practical examples in there and some feedback from the actual producers. So there are a few things which I learned from this 2-year program and installing and setting up agtech, and one of those is when you're talking about anything with radio frequencies is towers. So we seem to have to find high spots and put up towers or put antennas on existing towers. And that varied from, you can see some of the images here, from the top of windmills to the top of silos, to one of our collaborators sourcing a secondhand TV antenna off one of their neighbors. And along with being remote and having towers is actually getting power to places. So some of the considerations are, what's your landscape look like? What are your power resources and what are the power requirements of some of those devices and networks that we'll be setting up? I'm going to jump to the next one. And the second really strong insight was landscape, which I just put under the term trees and hills. Being flat isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, we did have some challenges in some of the flat country with just simply trying to get radio signals and connectivity through trees. And as you can see in the map there of our site at Blaney, it was extremely hilly terrain, and we had to put in multiple gateways to get coverage, and in some spots we couldn't, so we went to satellite for things like rain gauges in more remote parts of the property. So looking at that sort of multiple connectivity options was something that we had to do on most of the situations to get the right information from the different landscapes. So what were our successes? All the producers were really happy with water monitoring. We had various types of water monitoring, from tanks, troughs, to pipe flows, to even, you see the photo there, putting sensors onto creeks so they could tell when the creek was either flooding or was dry, saved on travel time, saved on getting to remote places at strange time, middle of the night, going down to check pumps and things like that, and could help with maintenance time, so identifying issues early. The second one was surveillance. Cameras for livestock surveillance and for security. all the producers were really happy with surveillance, getting cameras out there. But as we know, cameras require bandwidth. So we did need to put in Wi-Fi in some of those situations or have really good 4G connectivity. But being able to monitor things without having to leave where you're working, whether it's the office or the home, or being able to dial them up on your phone when you're mobile, was really beneficial. And the third one, on two of the sites, we had in paddock weighing, which both of those producers were really happy with. Just being able to see the progress of a mob of cattle and how it's going without having to guess, without having to get them in the yards and weigh them, just made there was better time management for when they were getting those cattle in for various different purposes. Some of the challenges we found, as I mentioned before, was working with radio, installation, trees, topography, antennas. Not insurmountable, but just something that needs to be considered. And then the other challenge was animal damage. I think we incurred every type of animal damage possible, from birds covering solar panels to hares and wallabies chewing cables, and cattle being able to somehow get through cattle guards and still rip antennas off with their tongues. So they're very inquisitive. So just some considerations there with installations for sure is, what are the challenges around animals? Thanks, Richard. So now I'd like to move on to farms of the future. So we were very fortunate in the fact with our pilot program and the information that we did provide into the proposal, along with a lot of industry consultation that the consultants did, that was announced in June in the government, that in the budget that they'd allocated $48 million to farms of the future for a major expansion over 4 years. New South Wales DPI was identified as the lead agency on that. So we've just starting to kick off that program at the moment. It's a really great opportunity to build capability in the regions, lift knowledge and awareness around ag tech, and actually get some ag tech out on farm. This program will be run in 11 LGAs across those sort of 5 main aggregated areas and cover multiple agricultural sectors. So focused on red meat sector, grains, cotton, and horticulture. So it's going to be a really fantastic opportunity, not only in those LGAs, but across the state to build capability and awareness and knowledge at a producer level, but also through the advisor network and just across the whole industry. So there's a large focus on building that capability and awareness. I'm going to jump to the next one, please, Richard. So the program is mapped out across multiple streams. The first stream at the moment, which is where we are as we're talking today, is really that program initiation stream. So setting up the project team, building all the ways of working. We're already scoping the 5 potential sites in those LGAs. In those particular locations, we're planning to set up information hubs with demo sites. At this point in time, they'll be on New South Wales DPI research stations, so we can get really good access for producers and to be able to run workshops, potentially field days, demos, and potentially even have some drop-in times where people can just come in and look at the tech and talk to a development officer there who can answer some of their questions and help them through the journey. One of the key things I mentioned before on the back of our ag guide is we're going to build an education and awareness program. So we're working with Tocal at the moment on designing both a workshop format plus an online format. So really bringing the concepts in the book alive. We're building that tool so that it can be used by not only us in this program, but can be picked up by industry and others to be used as well. So alongside of that program that will be part of the producer eligibility going forward in those LGAs. So the idea is that we can work directly in groups or potentially online with producers that are wanting to get into this space. And they'll run through that program and come out with a device plan. So really looking at taking them through that process of defining what they need or what's possibly some of the best options for them in ag tech and connectivity options for their particular situation. So we found in the pilot, even though there were some similarities across just our 3 farms that we were using, every situation was specific and different technologies worked better in different situations. So it's really a personalized program to go through. In those particular LGAs, there's some really good existing LoRaWAN networks, but we'll be building on the back of that and filling in some of the black spots in those networks and providing access to existing LoRaWAN networks for producers in those areas. And then we're going to launch in 2023 into a grants program. So we'll be looking at working with the producers which are eligible in those LGAs, which have been through the program, to provide assistance to get on board with AgTech. That program will have 2 rounds in 2023 and 24, sorry. And it won't be limited to LoRaWAN technology. That'll be open technology and include other forms of localized farm connectivity if producers have that as their need. Thanks, Richard. That's pretty much the wrap up of the current program. It is very early days. We're just in the process of setting up our team. A lot of those streams of work have already commenced to some degree. And really at this point in time, we're getting out there and engaging with stakeholders, whether it's suppliers, vendors, or industry bodies, to make sure that we can build the right partnerships to make it successful.
Well, thanks, Scott. That was great. And I guess in terms of a bit of a summary of what I think were the key takeouts of this is that agriculture is lagging behind other sectors, and there are reasons for that. In my opinion, having sort of dealt quite a lot in this area, if we cast our minds back about sort of 6 years ago in Victoria, we had a lot of money spent. I think it was originally associated with the sale of Telstra to automate a whole lot of water reticulation, but there wasn't the underlying sort of service network to maintain it. So in the end, there was a bit of a disconnect there. So it's sort of important to get the whole business ecosystem around it. So lots of money went in, but without the support network around it, in the end, the farmers didn't really embrace that adoption. And that was the early days of, I guess, automation around mobile phones and using those cellular networks to control things. So some learnings around that, and I think we've come a long way, and it's tremendous to see that support around getting connectivity happening now. But ag is lagging, but what's really exciting, in my opinion, is the potential is just starting to be realised around combining not only IoT and sort of what Scott's focused on a fair bit today, but also more of the satellite analysis tools that can be combined with that to produce predictive tools. So when you combine the Bureau of Met data with your on-ground sensing data and those sorts of things, you can really start to have foresight in how to manage your properties better. So it's very, very powerful, and there is a huge number of players coming into this area. The second thing is the value proposition piece. And I think this is a really good point, like, do you really need something remote to measure how much water you've got in a trough? or how much water is remaining in a dam, or how well your reticulation's working? Well, the answer to that is very farm specific, and I think what we heard in Scott's program is that it is farm specific, but they're going to offer a service here for people who want to take it up to actually look at
Roll, Richard.
I think we've lost Richard Marcio.
Yeah, Scott, if you wanna just keep talking about the kids, yeah, would be great.
Yeah, I think building on Richard's comment where he started talking around the value proposition and the return on investment, I think there's still a long way to go to make that easier to understand. It's a challenge that I think everyone's trying to address. And I'm sure the market is trying to do that as well. And I know there's some industry bodies looking at trying to address that as well. We had some really good verbals from our producers around different benefits they got, and quite often it's peace of mind to know that something's functioning and you don't have to worry and go and check it. But obviously with things like water monitoring, it's not that difficult for producers to do their own calculations of how many times they go and check a particular trough, tank or irrigation site, how long it takes them, how much they travel, what's the wear and tear. I think those sort of ROIs are pretty good to do on the back of an envelope yourself. But then again, it's some of the more complex decision making, which I think is harder to get a handle on. But that's part of our expanded program, is definitely looking at case studies within some of those producers which come on the program, and where we can build out some really more granular ROI around that. I think some of the other points Richard had there, well, we mentioned water monitoring, irrigation optimization is probably very similar. Cameras was really interesting. Having access to live footage or even just recorded footage, all of our collaborators really put high up the list. It's probably one of the most expensive and resource dependent parts, especially when you're looking at pushing live video all around your property. But some of the benefits that our collaborators saw, one of our cattle producers had a very large pan tilt zoom camera, so basically a camera on top of his shed that you can remote control from your office or your phone. And when he had his heifers in the yard calving, he could actually just have a quick look without having to drive up to the cattle yards every half an hour or an hour, and just give him peace of mind that they were okay, they weren't down, that they were still walking around. The same with one of our other producers, which had a set of sheep yards a long way away from their house, and when they had sheep there overnight or during the day, they could simply just dial in and have a look and make sure that everything was going okay. And then when you look at security, especially with still cameras, which were taking time-lapse photography, our producers could actually come in and look at images from their sheds or around their farm overnight, just to make sure that everything was okay and there hadn't been any security issues. So I think there's some really solid benefits in those areas, but it also is probably a challenge to get set up correctly. The in-paddock weighing was really interesting. It was pretty new technology when we brought it on board. Has been getting a lot of media coverage, but we're planning to get one unit and move it around the 3 properties, but we took it to our first collaborator and essentially they wouldn't let it go. So we had to go and source another unit for the second property. and I believe both of those collaborators have kept those units after that program finished. And just, I think it's the same thing, just knowing what's happening remotely, being able to see those aggregated weights go up or level out, or just to be able to monitor that. I mean, one of the stories one of the producers told us was they had a remote property which was several kilometres walk to the neighbour's cattle yard so they could weigh their cattle. So simply by understanding what the mob weight averages were doing, they could actually time better getting those cattle in to actually weigh them properly. Historically, they said they were either 3 weeks too early or 2 weeks late to get to the weights they wanted, whereas now they could get a better handle on what's happening with the mob without actually having to go and handle them and move them and weigh them properly. I'm not sure whether we've got Richard back on. Have we, Richard? Was he?
Yeah, Scott, I think we don't have Richard still
Okay.
back. So maybe we can move to the questions and answers. And then, yeah. So I think you are able to read.
I can read them out.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, there's a message here from Luke around, have we only considered LoRaWAN for low bandwidth monitoring? No, LoRaWAN is just one of the backgrounds. We're also looking at leveraging existing networks wherever possible, whether that's a 4G network or NB-IoT or LTMs, and now with satellite as well. So once we do get to the actual device side of things, we'll be connectivity agnostic as long as it fits with the producer's needs. And as I mentioned before, also looking at on-farm Wi-Fi, one for the benefits of being able to add security cameras, but also for Wi-Fi calling in parts of the property where you don't get normal 3-4G signal. So that's really important to have that connectivity, especially in remote places.
I'm back, Scott. Sorry about that.
You're right.
Zoom kicked me out.
I've covered your bit for you, Richard.
Excellent work. Did you talk about the Malone Institute as well?
No, but you can do that before I jump on to the next question, if you like.
Okay.
Richard, if you want to share your screen again. Thank you.
Okay. I will. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. I'll just take you back to a photo early in the presentation, which this photo on the bottom right is a portion of the catchment that the Malone Institute manages. So I think this particular project might be a bit of a vision for the future. Well, I'm pretty sure it is a vision for the future in quite a few applications. So the project is about rehydrating landscapes, and Hydroterra was engaged to monitor the effectiveness of doing this. So this is the Malone Creek in the picture here. And it's about how we can adapt the landscape to be more drought resilient by holding more water in the landscape. So the floodplains, which stretch out across various portions of the catchment, provide a target for rehydration. And by putting in leaky weir structures, of which one you can see in that photo, you can retain water in there to increase recharge of those floodplain areas, and therefore you have more water storage in your aquifers and in your soil moisture storage to handle the ups and downs of rainfall and climate extremes. So our challenge was to monitor that, to check on its effectiveness, and that project's been really good at really seeing the value of both real-time monitoring data measured both through the surface water bodies that you're seeing there, so whether it's levels of water in those stream reaches or flow, or whether it's the real-time soil moisture within the floodplains. That's been combined with satellite data to provide ways of scaling that data, because it's always difficult to scale from just a sensor point up to whole of catchment, and you need tools that allow you to do both. So sensors are great at looking at dynamics of systems, and satellite data is great at looking at the spatial context of that, as well as providing us with insights of how that changes with time. So this is a project which got federal funding, about $4 million, to really look at those processes. The learnings and where this project's heading is there's some real opportunity for farmers to be looking at ancillary benefits like carbon and carbon credits and biodiversity credits. So part of this project is looking at how to quantify those and ultimately how to link them to actual financial mechanisms to sell those credits, right? So it's been an interesting project, and it's required the use of the cellular telemetry networks. It's got a network of, oh goodness, I've forgotten the numbers, about 45 odd soil moisture capacitance probes, and all hooked up to telemetry, and a network of about 100 groundwater piezometers to allow us to quantify the groundwater storage and the soil moisture storage. It's also got 2 climate stations, also telemetered, which help us to really understand the overall water balance of the site. This is really to prove up, whether or not rehydration's working. What will be very interesting, and the real power out of this, will be combining it with that satellite data to look at how one can predict and quantify biodiversity changes, soil health changes, and that sort of thing, and develop the methods that can be used as indicators of those credits that I spoke about. So it's a really great project to be involved in, and many thanks to Scott and their program for funding another step in this project, really, which is to look at where does catchment rehydration make most sense to do. And that is about doing a spatial analysis, using a range of different data sets to look at where do we get best return on investment from undertaking rehydration activities, because it doesn't make sense to do it everywhere, right? So we have just commenced that project. DPI has just announced their project manager for the job, and out of that exercise, we will be developing a heat map of the state of New South Wales with where that process can be optimised, and where we can see lots of revegetation and better farm performance and better resilience to drought. So that's probably it around the Malone Institute, and many thanks to Scott for funding that one. So we might go back to the Q&A questions. So next question is from Sinail Hasnain. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Is there any technology pilots in relation to groundwater monitoring?
We didn't have any specifically focused on that. However, at all 3 of our collaborating farms, we did have bore level sensors in. So that was essentially monitoring groundwater level on that particular property. One of those was an irrigation bore on a vineyard. One was a stock bore in a grazing enterprise, and the other was an old stock bore which was very close by a large irrigation bore. So looking at almost the secondary levels and effect of that bore. So that was really at the producer level, and that was information that they were interested in, and it was essentially a water tank pressure sensor with an extremely long cable on it, which went down the bore, and they could monitor those bore heights.
In terms of, next question, sorry. So thanks for that, Scott. So Wayne Evans, were you using the LoRaWAN network for any control activities, e.g. pump start, or was it mostly monitoring?
Yeah, thanks. In our particular sites, it was only monitoring, so it was only one-way LoRaWAN. However, I know that the Climate Smart guys in their horticulture program, which I mentioned earlier, have been doing two-way control monitoring with LoRaWAN. So I know that they were setting that up over the last 6 or 8 months or so, but I'm not over that project, so can't give you an update, but not in ours, but in others, yes.
Okay, and have you found it reliable using LoRaWAN for control?
Oh, I wasn't part of it, so I haven't done it myself. Haven't been involved in it.
No worries.
Sorry.
All right, next question from Roger Burrett. Are drones used in any of the pilots, e.g. are they used in the winery industry?
Our pilots were specifically focused on devices needing connectivity backhaul, and generally at this point in time, drones are run by someone in the paddock. So we didn't use them in our pilot. We did use them for some of our augmented reality imagery and for our videos, which was really good. We didn't use them in an agricultural sense.
Okay. Are you seeing a lot more adoption of drones, so, like across the industry?
I think a lot more practical use of them. Just from my personal observations in the market, there was a run on them a few years ago and everyone got excited, and there was a lot purchased, but I've seen a lot sitting on people's office desks and in boxes in the corner. But I think now there's a lot more beneficial applications coming out. I think there's a lot more commercial use of drones. It'd be hard to comment on the producer use of drones, but there's some really good commercial operators out there providing some excellent diagnostic tools based on imagery now as a package. So they'll come out, can fly whatever crop you've got, and then are partnered with data analytics platforms which can provide decision support insights.
So do you see your program extending to those sorts of technologies as well?
Not in this particular round of pilots, no. We're focused on connectivity and enabling that connectivity, and then the devices that go with that connectivity. I think some of the information that will come from our program can be obviously leveraged with that drone imagery and other imagery to make better decisions. So really what we're providing is just one piece of the puzzle. As we know, agtech is much bigger than just IoT and connectivity, especially when you look at imagery, remote imagery, and then a lot of the information that you're getting off machines today is pretty vast.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure that people always use it, right? So sometimes there's more information than they can keep up with. In terms of LoRaWAN versus satellite telemetry and you know, this emergence of the microsatellite networks, and that sort of thing. Where do you see that heading, you know, in terms of being adopted on farms? Do you think LoRaWAN's going to be the most applicable for farmers, or do you think there's a place for those microsatellite networks in the farming space?
We found it was, down to the individual situation, which is part of what we want to build into our training and awareness program, is that you really need to go through that process and evaluate it. It depends on a whole lot of factors. Depends on your geography, depends on the number of devices, depends on the size and connectivity. So it really comes down to determining what you do and doing the numbers, and it could be a combination of both, which is what we had at our Blaney site, where we had really good LoRaWAN coverage across the vineyard, bits of the grazing enterprise, but then there were places where all we wanted was a rain gauge, so there's no point putting up a LoRaWAN gateway for one rain gauge, so we used satellite rain gauges.
So do you think, you know, I've got a couple more questions here I should ask, but do you see the LoRaWAN coverage, you know, extending statewide eventually, or do you think it's going to be clustered? And
I think it's going to be clustered just by the nature of the radio frequencies and how it works. And as I said, it's a bit like the rain gauge concept. There's no point installing a gateway for two devices when you can get that information probably by another mechanism, whether it's, you know, LTEM, those sort of low bandwidth 4G type technologies, or satellite, or others. So,
yeah. A comment here from Julian Smith. G'day, Julian. Just a comment that drones are being used more often by consultant agronomists for in-crop management decisions. Do you have a view on that comment, Scott?
Oh, I'd agree with it. Yep.
That's good to hear.
I think the challenge comes down to, it's the ROI of your time, really. I know a lot of them are using them in large broadacre scenarios to do scouting, so they can actually scout in the middle of paddocks rather than drive around the outside. So it's a really ROI on time and then that skill as well.
Yeah. Next question, another question from Wayne Evans. Was there any specific information that came through from the pilots in relation to the improvement of farm performance, e.g. 10% reduction in water use or X% productivity improvement?
We didn't go to that level of evaluation. We were really looking at the grower experience and level of understanding of the technology. We didn't really get into those economic evaluations. I think if you dig around, you can probably find some stats on that. There were some very high level ones in the precision to decision work done in, I think, 2017. So we didn't provide that information out of our evaluation.
It's certainly it's one of the bigger challenges, right? So we're working on that in that Maloon project to look at what are the methods to measure productivity, and you know, what are the key metrics that can be used and readily measured. I think it's a big part of the puzzle, isn't it? If you get those models right. I know, you know, packages like Maya grazing and that sort of thing start to head down that path. I think it is a big thing that Wayne's raised there, that if you can really get your metrics to align with what you need to know about your productivity, then there'll be a lot more adoption of that technology.
Yeah, I think that the most documented or best documented example would be using soil moisture probes in irrigation, which is, you know, neutron probes have been used since the 80s, and there's some really good stats around water use efficiency and irrigation management and getting your timing right through just using that one device. Now with modern technology and connectivity, they're probably not as accurate as a neutron probe, but some of the probes now you can have them one in each of your fields and get that information a couple of times a day. So it's really around timeliness, I think, now with the new technology that's out there.
Yeah, it's certainly a bit easier with the water side of things to get the value proposition, because you can measure everything pretty accurately. And we're seeing that with some of these irrigation tools like Swan systems, where people are quite happy to pay quite a bit of money per pivot because they know they're getting that saving. So it's definitely moving that way. We don't have any more open questions at the moment, but there are a few questions in the chat. I'll see if I can get those open. I think all of those have been dealt with. Q&A, two more. Maybe check the questions at the top too. Sounds like I might have missed a couple at the beginning. No, I think that's all the questions. So Scott, many thanks for presenting today. It's been great to, Giuseppe's saying I've missed his question. Where is your question, Giuseppe? Oh, there's a couple more that have popped up, sorry. What's the best way to reach out to Scott with new technology that might be useful to the industry? That's from Teal Watkins.
If you just go to the New South Wales NSW DPI climate, Google that and go to the Farms of the Future page. The details should be there. There's also a web form at the bottom where you can register interest. So just fill that in and type your comments down the bottom. There's actually a free text part at the bottom of that, or contact Richard.
Good answer there, Scott. In terms of, there's a question from Roger Burrett. Is the electricity cost increased by much with adoption of these technologies?
I would say no, especially with LoRaWAN, it's low power. So essentially your devices in the paddock run off a battery for several years or a very small solar panel. Probably the cost of getting remote power was something which was got to be part of your thinking if you don't have normal power, but not with most of it. And probably, I suppose, electricity might be one of your efficiencies if you're talking about irrigation pumps and running them. But a lot of the field devices are low power devices.
Yeah, so typically solar powered or just batteries. So I'd say you're going to save on power because you'll be optimizing your pumping.
I think Giuseppe's question's right at the top.
Know how to get right
What is
up
the
to
overall
the top.
response from farmers about these remote monitoring tools? Is it just a financial decision or also a new understood model to use to manage farms being more efficient? What's the current education level in this industry in terms of people and users to be able to adopt this? Well, if I can tackle the last one first, it's very low at the moment, which is part of the focus on education and awareness in our program. There are some stats around that in the precision to decision work they did on agtech adoption, and it's been identified that that's one of the gaps as an industry we want to address to build that level. Our first step to do that is running this program and running the ag guide. It's a plain language guide to some high-tech type of solutions. So I think just building the confidence, understanding some of the language is a challenge. And the first part of it, what's the response? Well, I can only give the response to basically our collaborators. And it really depends on the benefits they get. So as I mentioned, with the technology that we put out, anything to do with managing water, they thought was great. water's an expensive and important resource, whether it's livestock or cropping. So managing that better for productivity or animal welfare measures is really important. And then just knowing what's happening around your property. A lot of producers are trying to juggle a lot of balls at once, and being able to be confident that one part of their operation is going well and they don't have to spend a lot of time looking at it. They can divert time to another more important part of their business at that point in time. So yeah, really about time and peace of mind and making better decisions.
Okay, we've got an anonymous question, or an anonymous attendee asking their question. What are your recommendations for water monitoring? Pretty broad.
Yeah, it depends. Depends what you're monitoring, whether it's tanks, troughs, river flow, pipe flows, irrigation flows. So really you need to go back to look at what you want to monitor in your water situation, and then look at the different technologies available. So there's no one solution I would recommend at all. You have to look at each individual situation.
Okay, so maybe finally the question is, you're going to be running these or setting up these networks, and then you're looking for farmers who may want to participate. How do they sort of keep in touch to know when the gates will be open to be able to apply and go through that process with yourself?
Well, we'll be running some pretty intensive communications campaigns early next year. So it's a bit of a watch this space. But probably if they want to just do their own updates, just check that DPI NSW climate webpage on Farms of the Future, or just Google New South Wales DPI Farms of the Future and go there. That's where we're going to be posting the latest information. But in those actual target LGAs, we'll be working with local stakeholders in those areas to make sure we get the latest information out.
Very good. Well, Scott, thanks very much for today. I think our questions have been exhausted and our time is up, but it was great, and it's a great initiative too, obviously, to drive this. So many thanks for your time today. It's been great.
Great, thanks,
Thank
Richard.
you.
I appreciate the opportunity to give her an update of all the different streams of activity that DPI is doing in that agtech space.
And thanks everyone for coming along too. We really appreciate you being here. All right, thanks very much.